We're reading The Road to Paris. At the end of chapter 6, Paris had a nightmare, and we're going to see what happens next to her in chapter 7, Backyard Beast. Paris slipped downstairs and out the back door to explore the grounds while everyone else was still asleep. Quiet escapes were getting to be her specialty. Wow, this was no postage stamp backyard. It was a green and floral field to run in. The right was edged with hydrangea bushes, bursting with giant pink and blue blossoms. Towering above them were a smattering of trees rooted in the next yard over, and through the trees Paris could make out a silver snake glistening in the morning sunlight, moving north to south. Of course, it wasn't a snake at all. It was the Hudson River slithering by. The river the train followed to bring me here, thought Paris. The river that could take me home. But where was home? Not with the Boones. Not with Grandma. Not even with Viola, because she never seemed to belong anywhere in particular. Home was such a funny word. For most kids, home was where your mom and dad lived, where you felt safe, where the boogeyman was merely make-believe. Home was where you knew every square inch of the place by heart, where you could wake up in the middle of the night and know exactly where you were without even opening your eyes. Paris didn't have a place like that. She didn't even have an address she'd lived at long enough to memorize. No single place that felt familiar as all that, except maybe the city itself. For Paris, home was more a person, and that person was Malcolm. I could follow that river back to Malcolm, but how do I know Malcolm is even there anymore? Paris kicked the ground and shook off the question. She had no answer, and there was no way to find out the truth. At least, not yet. Paris turned her attention back to the yard. Whitewashed arbors framed a small grapevine in the center of the yard. Here and there, a few blue-black grape globes still held on tenaciously. Otherwise, Paris would have no idea what she was looking at. There were no grapevines on Lenox Avenue. The left side of the yard was enclosed by a picket fence, and in the back corner stood an old tool shed. There had been one in the yard in Queens. Wonder what's in there? Paris crossed the yard to find out. Her hand was on the doorknob when she heard a snarling sound behind her. Legs suddenly paralyzed, Paris slowly turned her head. There stood the scariest looking dog she'd ever seen. What was it Malcolm had taught her to do if she ever had to face a strange dog? Never let the dog know that you're scared of him, Malcolm had told her. Speak softly to him and back away very, very carefully. Nice doggy, said Paris, inching away from the shed, trying to move past the long-toothed beast. Nice doggy. Nice. Ah! The dog knocked Paris to the ground and stood over her. Paris was too frightened to scream. She squeezed her eyes shut and waited for dog fangs to sink into her and rip her to pieces. 1, 2, 3. Paris felt a mess of sloppy, wet licks on her cheek. Oh, yuck. That's Jet, said Jordan, slamming the screen door behind him. We call him that 'cause he's fast. Did he scare you? Course not, said Paris, wondering if her heart rate would ever return to normal. He's just a big old fluffy dog. Jordan came over and scratched the collie behind the ears. Seems to like you, said Jordan. Paris stood up and brushed herself off. Nice doggy, she whispered, tentatively reaching out to pet him. Maybe I'll be here long enough to get to know you, huh? What do you think about that? Jet barked excitedly as if in answer. Paris stroked the collie's back, smiling for the first time in days. Well, that's the end of chapter 7. Maybe Paris is getting a little more comfortable in her new home. Or maybe not. We're not sure yet. We're going to find out the next part of her journey in chapter 8. So come with me to chapter 8. We are reading The Road to Paris, chapter 8, Breathless. The second night, Paris experienced the Lincolns' nightly routine. When all the children were in bed, Mrs. Lincoln made the rounds, stopping in each room to say good night, switching off the lights, and close the door. Paris was snuggled under the covers when Mrs. Lincoln suddenly filled the doorway of her tiny alcove. "Good night, Paris," she said, hitting the wall switch and closing the door in one deft motion, leaving Paris to drown in a sea of darkness. The moon was no friend. The sliver of light that found its way through the window hardly made a dent in the darkness. Paris clung to her bedspread, her heart galloping inside her chest. "Just close your eyes," Paris told herself, like Malcolm had told her to do 1,000 times. Paris pulled down the shades of her eyes and pretended all the darkness was behind her lids, that the room beyond them was really streaming with light. This trick worked for a while, and her heartbeat slowed a bit. Then she could swear she felt rough wool scrape her cheek. She flailed out, hitting nothing but air. "Ouch!" Paris felt something sharp digging into the flesh behind her knees, but the sharpest things in the bed were her own fingernails. Paris cringed. What was that? She heard a skeleton key turning in the lock of the bedroom door. Or did she? Real or imagined, that was the sound that undid her. David was already snoring in the next room, but little Jordan was awake enough to hear Paris cry herself to sleep. The next night was no better, though at least this time Paris knew what was coming. She dragged out her bedtime routine for as long as she could. She undressed, moving in slow motion. She slipped out of her skirt and hung it neatly in the wardrobe. She buttoned and rebuttoned her pajama top twice. "You all better be in bed by the time I get there," Mrs. Lincoln called upstairs. Paris bit her lip, wondering how on earth Mrs. Lincoln knew she was stalling. Reluctantly, Paris scrambled up onto the bed and waited. When she heard the woman climbing the stairs, Paris felt her throat constrict. When Mrs. Lincoln reached the boys' room next door, Paris felt her skin crawl. By the time the woman approached her doorway, Paris could scarcely breathe. As the door closed, sealing off all light from the hallway, Paris gulped, longing for what scrap of light the way the hungry long for scraps of bread. Once again, as much as she hated herself for it, Paris cried herself to sleep. This time, it was David who heard her. But fear finally drove Paris into a deep sleep where ugly memories stomped into her dreams. "Let me out! Let me out!" Paris pounds the bedroom door with her puny fists, but the door is locked. "Hush up!" a voice hisses through the keyhole. "If you ever think about crying to your caseworker about this, I'll come back and beat the black off you." Paris and Malcolm huddled together in the middle of the closet, rocking each other back and forth, back and forth. "Now lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." Paris says this over and over and over again. Tweedy jacket pockets scratch her tender cheek. She slaps away at the rough wool, whimpering in the cramped and stuffy space. She and Malcolm take turns perching atop a rigid Samsonite cosmetic case. The cool brass fittings dig into the flesh behind her knees. A roach makes his way along her calves and up her thigh. She slaps her thigh to get it off her, but even after she knocks it to the floor, her skin still crawls. Her cheeks are streaked with tears, but no one is there to wipe them away except her brother, who has tears of his own. Paris squeezes her legs together as hard as she can. She bounces up and down. She rocks, but it is no use. She has to go to the bathroom, except there is no bathroom inside that closet, and she can't get out. Big girls don't wet their pants, but she can't help it. When she can't hold it any more, she cries anew and lets it go. Paris roused herself from a deep sleep. Oh no! Her bedsheets are soaking wet. She leaped to the floor, tearing off her soiled pajamas in a fit of anger. Shame burned through her straight through until dawn. Well, Paris is having flashbacks of things that have happened to her in the past. Hopefully that dream will not become her new reality. We can continue our story in chapter 9. So come back with me as we continue on the road to Paris.